The Artist's Toolkit, a training program for the artistic process, problems, background, and exercises.
Hello and welcome. This is Kaethe Wenzel with the Artist's Toolkit. And today it's all about showing your work. So today is about publishing, exhibiting, and making accessible. How and where do you show what you have been working on? And this is a huge field. There are so many ways of exhibiting or showing your work, all very different. It's impossible to give you a standard recipe or even any rules at all. So the only thing actually is to have a number of questions that can help you find out what will work best for what you have been working on. So we talk about 3 points today. First, about context, which is where, which is in what setting can you show or do whatever you're planning to do. Second, presentation, which is about how, in which shape, how do you make visible, how do you make it work, what you want to show or what you want to do. And access, so how do you make sure that people actually come and see what you have been doing or what you're planning to do. Because by now you have tried out many things. You've collected themes and you have identified ideas. And I'm sure you have run into blocks and you have had frustrated evenings where you wanted to throw everything into the bin. And you have experimented, you have created material, and you have thrown out stuff. And hopefully you've also had really good discussions with others about what is good, about, what has fascination, what is intense, and what you want to continue to look at or to be in touch with. And I hope that you continue to develop whatever felt intense and to cast out everything else and to make the thing that was intense, to make it stronger. And now you have an idea or a schedule or a model or a finished piece somewhere in your place or wherever you work or in your mind. And now it's better, if it's something material, if it's not a performance, if it involves material, it's better if you have more or less finished it already. And now you want to make it accessible to other people, you want to share it. And this is actually one of the most important differences between your private self-expression and art. We've talked about this. Remember when you have a large group of people and you shout, "What is art?" Then you will most probably get back an answer like, "Art is self-expression." And no, it isn't. It's not. Self-expression is great and it's therapeutic and it's really good for your personal emotional hygiene, and it's like writing in a diary, and it's good. Do it. But it's not art yet. Because mostly people agree by now, at the present time, of course, there have been different definitions of what art is over time, and there are lots of different definitions of what art is now. But most people agree that art means to do something, to alter reality, to give access to an object in a way that gives people the possibility to get into an emotional or a thought process. So art is art when somebody else has the possibility to connect with it, to be fascinated by it, when others can start inner processes. Art is not when it's only about you alone. Normally, in general, it is agreed. So, art is a lot about communication, about exchange. And in order to make it possible for others to get into communication or into an exchange with what you do, it needs to be accessible. And though I say this is a contemporary definition, actually there was this writer in the 12th century called Marie de France. She was really famous in the 12th century. And please read her. Today we would say she was a fantasy writer and a bestseller author. And at the time what she was writing was called Les. Actually there's a werewolf in it and a lot of interesting stuff happening. And it was very, very unusual. 11th century, it's like 900 years ago. A lot of people didn't even know how to write, especially women. Women weren't taught how to write. And everybody who was not rich wasn't taught how to write. Mostly mostly people who knew how to write were A, very important, and B, normally in the church. So we don't know so much about Marie de France. She certainly was somebody with a privilege. And she wrote and she published, and it was quite unusual for her to publish under her own female name. And she said, I publish, though I am a woman, because for things to become useful, it is necessary that they be talked about. And only when something becomes famous, it can start to bloom. That's what she actually said. Whatever you do, it needs to become famous. It needs to be talked about in order for it to unfold its blossoms. That's what she actually said. Of course, she said it in medieval French. So, meaning, whatever you do on your own, you can do the most intricate, fascinating, great stuff on your own. But if you want it to have an effect, if you want it to be useful for others, if you want for others to continue it, if you want it to bloom, you need to put it out there. And yeah, as I said, that's from 900 years ago. It's still valid. And interestingly, the German regulations on PhDs are quite similar, coming from completely different perspective. Not 900 years old, but still. They more or less say the same. You can write the most fascinating, erudite, and important book on your own. As long as you keep it at home in your drawer, it doesn't count. It does not count. You will not be a PhD. You only get the title if you publish. So the point is, only you can be a genius. You can be brilliant, however brilliant you want. But you need to share whatever you've thought about, whatever you have found out. You need to share it with the community. And then you get the title. The same is true for art. Whatever you do, it needs to be accessible for others. It needs to be there for others to get into a process, to discuss it, to work on it, to continue it, to think about it. And that's why today is so important. That's why today we talk about these 3 points of context, of presentation, and of access.
The Artist's Toolkit.
So, whatever you have been working on, which is probably something that works with no or not so many words, something that is very visual, something that has a certain fascination, something that helps people into processes without speech. Yeah, something like that. You're working on that. The question is, what is it you're doing? What's happening there? The question is, what kind of setting does it need to unfold its blossoms? What kind of setting does it need for it to work? For example, is it something monumental, very colorful, very loud that talks to a lot of people at once? Or is it maybe something small and intimate and something that people need to think about on their own? So the first questions are, who are you talking to? Are you talking to one person? Are you talking to a group? And what is the setting? Is it like what you're doing? Is it like a declaration? Is it like Speaker's Corner? Do you have to get up on a box and talk to a lot of people, do a great speech, which is wonderful? Or is it more like whispering into the ear of a passersby, which is also wonderful? It's just, everything is great. It's just the quality is different. And you need to find the quality that suits your idea and your project. Okay, so number 1, context, which is about the place, the setting. Whatever you're doing, you may be working on a performance, you may be working on an intervention which may consist of demolishing a wall somewhere, okay? But maybe you also have something very traditional like a drawing in a frame, which is also fine. Now imagine a drawing. You're drawing in a frame. Very, very traditional getup. And you can show it in 3 places, the same piece, and it would be different according to the place. Obvious, right? For example, you could show it in your bedroom, you could show it in a cafe, or you could show it on a billboard. And the difference wouldn't be in your work. The difference would be that there will be completely different people who see it in a completely different mood. or they wouldn't get to see it because it's so small that they overlook it when they rush past the billboard looking on their phone or thinking about shopping or whatever. They just wouldn't notice it. Or they just don't get into your bedroom and won't get to see it. Or maybe it is so disgusting that the lady in the cafe says, okay, can't show it, it'll put the customers off their food. So the first question, where? Pick a place that suits your piece. And try to imagine how your piece works in a certain place, and then try to find the best place for it. Okay. And now remember, context, setting. This is more than location. This also means a social context. Who is coming there? What kind of groups are coming there? And what for? Yeah, because that's important for the mood that people will be in when they get in touch with whatever you've been doing. Imagine, it makes a difference whether people come somewhere to do sports or to pray, right? Or if they want to hang out with their friends, or if they want to study. Very different mood, very different atmosphere. So try to imagine who is coming there, in what mood. What kind of, will they be perceptible for whatever you have been doing, or for whatever you are trying, for what you want to show or what you want to make happen? For example, you have this super loud, super political, super colorful, really, really impressive piece. Does it make sense to put it up in a Buddhist meditation space? It could be, depending on the space. Or do you have this small, very fine piece that people have to look at, that people have to discover slowly? Can you show it in a supermarket? I would always say, yes, of course, you can. You just have to pick the right place, the right angle. You just have to find the right place in the large setting of the supermarket. But, maybe there are other places which suit that piece better than the supermarket. Or maybe there is a place with a certain atmosphere, and you decide to put something or to do something in that place that is completely against and completely very, very different from this atmosphere. Like in music, when somebody uses discordant sounds and to create a jarring sound because you want this kind of friction and you want a little provocation. Excellent. Do it. But do it consciously. It needs to be a choice. So the question here is always, if there is a place that has a certain atmosphere, do you want to reinforce the atmosphere or do you want to go against it? And then check, okay, what kind of place is this? What kind of atmosphere it is here? Do you work with it or against it? Who comes here? In what mood? And does it fit your piece? Okay, so that's your first checklist. And then, okay, whatever you do or show, for example, you put you put up a piece somewhere, like a traditional piece, like a drawing or painting or something that is on the wall, a flat piece, traditional. Is it big enough? If it's, do people see it? If it's too small, can you make it bigger? For example, is it a traditional piece in a frame that is seen as a window into another world? Then is this the right place for a window into another world, for example? And there are spaces like modern museums or galleries where people go because they want to look at art and they want to think and they want a quiet moment. Since the middle of the 20th century, we've had this space that is called a white cube. That is supposed to be an ideal white space with kind of low impact. And the ideal white space wouldn't even have power outlets or anything. It would just be this white space where you have art and you look at it and there's nothing to distract you from it. You could just enjoy the surfaces, the materials, the color, whatever it is, and nothing else. So do you have the kind of piece that would thrive in this kind of environment? Is it, something where there is no distraction, that is where people can just concentrate on form and material? Or maybe you say, that sucks. Like, it's really, really boring, these white bourgeois spaces where not everybody gets, it's just problem of who goes there. And okay, you're not about that. You say, I want to show art, I want to make art where people already are, like in an everyday environment, like out in the streets. I do interventions or street art or street performance, or I just do art, but I want it to be where people already are. I don't want people to have to go out of their way and to step out of their everyday life to see what I do. And then, for example, you do something at the bus stop. And maybe that needs to be a little more forceful than something that you do in a white cube. Not necessary, but could be. Because, the situation, it's raining and you're standing at the bus stop and you're waiting for the bus, and then suddenly you discover somebody has been doing something there. There are stickers or graffiti, or somebody is doing an impromptu performance in the rain, and it's just wonderful, right? It's so wonderful because before that you had this gray feeling inside yourself, and then suddenly there's this different reality, and it's just, wow, good, right? So if you work outside, if you work in an everyday setting, question is, how is your piece visible directly? Is it recognizably art? Is it so strange that it only can be art? Or maybe is it a piece that doesn't have such clear boundaries with the surrounding everyday life? Is it maybe something that is more like an irritation that makes people doubt about what is real and what isn't? Is it a secret? Is it very obvious? What is the character of this piece, of this idea? Is it loud? Is it silent? Is it many-voiced? Does it have to be discovered? All this defines which place, which context, which people, which group, which atmosphere are right for your piece. Whether it's the bus stop or the white cube, whether it's your bedroom or the cafe or the billboard or your dojo, whatever. And once you've found a good place, we come to point number 2, which is presentation.
The Artist's Toolkit.
And it may sound like something very similar, but it's not really. Because we said, okay, a place, a location is about atmosphere, about how do people feel, who comes there, what is possible there. And presentation is about how do you make your piece work in that location different? How do you make sure it can be seen or experienced? What does your piece need in that specific place? For example, is it going to be touched? Is it okay if it's going to be touched? Is it solid enough to be touched? Will it dissolve when it is being touched, and is that okay? Or will it rain on it? If it rains on it, is that okay? Will people bump into it? Whatever. Always the question is it okay? Is it okay for a piece to be destroyed? Is it part of the piece? Or should it be made to last? Should it be able to withstand what can happen to it when you show it? So the question is always, are you in a quiet location, which is kind of safe, where you can show something fragile? And when you have something fragile, does it maybe need a pedestal? Very, very classical. Pedestal. Pedestal always makes very clear that whatever is on top, even if it's your old sock, it's art. Or is there maybe a niche? Or is there something like a cubicle with a curtain? And if there is a curtain, what does it look like from 5 meters away? I come somewhere and there is a curtain 5 meters away, and do I see this curtain and then I walk up to it and then I lift it and then I have this moment of revelation, this ta-da, when I discover what's behind it? Or is it maybe the curtain is transparent, so when I'm 5 meters away I see, there's something going on, but I'm not sure what. And then I walk up to it. And with every step, it becomes a little clearer what's behind the curtain, maybe. So all this drama that's happening when you approach the crime scene. All that is up to you to, design somehow.
The Artist's Toolkit.
The question is always, what is it that you see, and how do you discover, how do you approach the piece, the place where something is going on? And if it's not visible, even though it should be, then the question is, okay, maybe it needs light, or it needs darkness, or does it need signage? I mean, signage can, of course, be a bit of like in your face, but there's subtle ways of signage. For example, a blood trail on the floor, very subtle. But you could also have, could also have sticky tape, colored sticky tape on the floor. Or what we used to have in Germany during the war, like fluorescent stripes on the wall that became visible in the dark. Or, decide. And then you also need to decide if maybe you need to change your piece or remake it in a way, especially outside. That can happen. I've been going on about that. Very often we do stuff inside, and when we take it outside, we are surprised because suddenly it's only half the size it was inside. That's the typical problem. Something that is 2 meters inside suddenly measures only 1 meter and 20 once you take it out the door, apparently. Just looks a lot smaller. Please remember this. Also, if you do something for outside, of course, you need to know exactly how long you want to piece to survive the weather, to survive drunk people at night, to survive dogs, to survive kids, whatever. For example, if you have something and you want to do it outside only for one evening or one afternoon, that can be, and you will be there. That can be a completely different piece, for example, in comparison to a piece that has to survive the night. Especially, for example, a Friday or Saturday night when drunk people will come past and kick it or whatever. Or if you want to leave something for a month outside, dogs will pee on it, it will rain on it, the sun will burn it. And it just, if you want it to survive all that, you need to use the right materials. And of course, you also need to check, for example, with the city authorities, what you can put where. Unless it's part of your piece that maybe it will be taken care of by the city and they will cart it off. Whatever. As I said, everything is great as long as it's part of the piece. For example, let's get back to that billboard. I like that billboard example. I love this, you co-opt a billboard. Of course, this is completely illegal, so it's better to check first with whoever owns the billboard whether you can use it. But once you have secured a billboard that you can use, then make sure you use the right visual language for it that is adequate for what you have, what you have there. So please, it needs to have some impact. It needs to have some really big energy. It should be very visible. It needs to be able to stop people in their tracks while they're walking past and looking on their mobile phone. So it probably needs to be monumental and very visible. But you could also try to go for the opposite and have something that is very small and subtle and that is whispering down from the billboard. Might also be interesting, though it may be more difficult to achieve. But go for it, give it a try. Let's assume you have something entirely different. Let's assume you have a book. There is this huge, wonderful realm of the artist's book. And a book, of course, has a small format, and a book per se, just by its size, is normally something for one person or maybe two to look at, to leaf through. If you make a book, you already know this is about a dialogue or maybe a trialogue, not more. And maybe it takes time to look at it, and maybe you need to provide an upholstered chair and a reading lamp and a kind of space that is a little private where somebody has time to look at it. And of course, a book needs to survive being touched and handled, unless it's part of the piece that it, kind of vanishes as soon as you touch it. It would also be very interesting. However, so you need for this. So the format, the medium, of course, also is important, and it determines kind of the way how it needs to be presented, how people can access it.
The Artist's Toolkit.
Okay, billboard, book, or something in between. Imagine there is a very, very small, very dark side street, some place in your city where it's always dark. And you do a very small intervention and put a small LED on top of it. Could be really cool, like a miniature shrine, and you make a hole in the wall or a graffiti or put a picture up or have performing mice, whatever. So that would be kind of in between, it would be small, it would be intimate, it would be a bit like looking at a book, but it would be outside. Also very interesting. So to sum it up, in order to show your work in a good context, in a good setting, and to present it well, it is important to decide what kind of atmosphere and what kind of attention is best for your piece. For example, is it something that people need to feel with their entire body, something that they step on, or something that they punch? Does it have to be outside where a lot of people are, or is it small and subtle? Does it need a kind of meditative space? So which setting do you create for your piece? And which kind of axis does your piece to bloom? As we said, coming back to Marie de France all the time. What kind of material is it? Does it need some kind of protection? Does it need some kind of safety measures? This is where we get to point number 3. Yeah, we had the setting, we had presentation. Number 3 is about access.
The Artist's Toolkit.
Access is also important. And access about how do people actually come to where your stuff is. For example, that is a problem that a lot of land artists had in the 60s and 70s, doing gigantic monumental stuff in the desert where nobody ever comes past. And we don't talk about it so much, but doing land art out in the desert of Nevada or something also meant that you had to organize bus tours for people to come and see it. Or you had to have a really good photographer and make sure that people would see the photograph, which is not the same at all, and an entirely different piece. Okay, so, of course, when you show your work, there are a lot of situations where this question, how will people get there? How will people get access and see it? Where that question is already taken care of. For example, in a museum, in any kind of gallery or art space. But also, for example, at your sports club, where people are coming anyway. Or, as I said, at the bus stop, my favorite example, the bus stop. People will be there anyway, regardless. So that will be taken care of. And maybe even that shrine situation in the dark side street, maybe that little LED light would actually make people come there. Maybe. Or maybe your piece is so monumental that nobody can miss it, for example. But what about the book? What about the book where people need to sit down and leaf through it and kind of experience it slowly and with a bit of calm? Even if you have a show, if you're in a group show, how are you going to organize this? Will there be a kind of separate corner? And if there is a separate corner, how are people going to find it? Or if you want to show your book in the city space, do you maybe have a booth? I don't know, in the shopping zone? But do you co-opt one of those booths where people sell strawberries? And if you do, how do you make clear that there is art happening going on inside? Is there a sign, or will people queue up, or will somebody talk to people? Like these people that you have in front of Mediterranean restaurants that try to usher you in. Will you have an usher in front of your booth who invites people to come in and look at your artist's book, for example? I had this great student, Pauline, who made a wonderful piece for people who couldn't see, for people who are blind or mostly blind, which seems kind of fair because there's so much art for everybody else and very little art for people who don't see so much. I mean, at least visual art. And she thought about this a lot. She did this great piece with a quotation, with a text in braille. Braille is... there's writing in little lumps, little bumps on surfaces. You often see it in the elevator. Yeah, you have the 1, 2, 3 for the floors, and then next to the lettering, very often you see these little bumps, and that's actually braille writing for blind people. And she said, okay, she would do a piece in the public realm, in the city space, with a text in braille for people who couldn't see. Something that you could read with your fingers. And of course, the question was, okay, normally, when somebody does visual art in the public realm, it is somehow visible and people will see it and go there, right? Or people will talk about it and then you will know where to go. And we're used to some kind of visual trap. We're used to be attracted by signals in terms of light or color or something, or with some kind of signage system. But here, it really was an important question. How do you make people go there? Or how do you make sure people can find it if the people who can actually access your piece are people who are more or less blind? So, and the same goes for every piece. For example, the question is always, who is where are the people? And which kind of instrument do you use to attract them? Do you use something like a trumpet, or is it more something subtle like an insect cry? So where do you find your public? And if you find them, what about people for whom your system, your instrument doesn't work? Are there other methods, other systems? And Pauline came up with this really nice idea. She said, okay, we have this big staircase in the middle of the city, and with long banisters, and people who walk down the stairs, and especially people who cannot see, will always use the banisters. So I put the text in braille writing underneath the banisters where people will feel it. And people who do, like you and me probably, or me at least, I don't know how to read this. I probably wouldn't even notice it. But people who know how to read this special kind of writing, they will feel it. They will start reading it with their fingers while walking down the steps. So that's how she solved it. She put the artwork where people would come across it, where people would discover it more or less by accident. And I love that solution.
The Artist's Toolkit.
Why am I telling you this? Okay, 3 points. When you think about making your work public and accessible and to share it, questions are, what is the right location? What is the right context, the right setting? What is the right atmosphere? Do you work with the atmosphere or against it? What kind of conditions do you have there? Does your piece need some kind of protection, reinforcements? How do you make sure that people discover it, and how do people approach it? How does it have to be made? And then there's the whole thing about safety measures, about public security. Is it large? Is it small? Does it need special lighting? Are there any, is there a special system to show where it is? What kind of atmosphere do you create to make it possible for people to make a certain kind of experience? What kind of experience will you want to make possible? What kind of experience do you want to share? And of course, we are all aware that one of our problems as a human race is that we cannot really share experience. But we can open up a field in which it is possible to make related experiences and things we can talk about. And that's, of course, what we're trying to do normally when we make art. There is a lot of literature about this field. A lot of it is very, very theoretical and very fascinating and very complex. And I've given this a lot of thought. And I've decided not to give you any reading tips today, because I think you have enough to do to solve this practically. Basically, I have given you this survey, this number of questions that you need to answer, and I think that is enough work. And actually, I think, so there's a lot of work, and actually, I think the best way for you to get through this is not to read, but this time to really, really figure it out by doing it practically, exclusively.
Exercise.
And though I didn't bring you anything, any reading recommendations this time, there are 2 exercises that I would recommend to do. Something to try out with a maquette, or maybe try out directly in real life. Whatever suits your idea and whatever isn't too much work and whatever is easiest to do. It's very important for this exercise that you make it easy to do, that you don't make it too big or complicated. Keep it small, okay? So exercise number 1 is make something that is quiet, meditative, that needs to be perceived or looked at or dealt with alone. Something that is maybe beautiful, calming. What could this be? Where and how? How would you present it? How would it be accessible? Something that makes people get in touch with themselves, okay? Where would you present it? In what context? In what kind of atmosphere? How would you make sure that people actually come across it? How would you present it? What would you have to think of? What materials, what safety measures, and so on. And exercise number 2 is do the opposite. Do something that is kind of loud, that people will talk about, people make argue about it. Something that has to be seen or dealt with in a group. Something that is polarizing. What would that be? Where would you show this? Which form would it take? What size? How big? How small? How would it be accessible? So try these 2 things. Do something small, intimate, and meditative, and do something that makes people argue with each other. And decide what would be the right setting, what would be the right form, and how it would be accessible. That's it for today, and I wish I could see what you're going to do.
The Artist's Toolkit. Conceptualized and presented by Kaethe Wenzel. Assistance, Nadia Driller. A project by European University Flensburg.